In AD 1047, Count Drogo Hauteville gained recognition as an imperial vassal from Holy Roman Emperor Henry III. During his brief stay in Capua in early 1047, Henry made several significant decisions, some of which were ill-considered. His aim was to balance the local powers, countering the influence of Guaimar and diminishing his alliance with the Normans. However, these efforts ultimately created a new imbalance, as most of his decisions ended up benefiting the Normans of Apulia. By elevating Drogo to the status of an imperial vassal, Henry granted him a prestige that his Norman counterparts in Apulia could not rival. Drogo was no longer just one of several equals in a shared cause. Instead, he had clearly gained a more prominent position relative to the other counts and barons. The emperor had inadvertently strengthened a potentially dangerous vassal. Henry's miscalculations did not end there. When the city of Benevento, an imperial protectorate, refused to grant him entry, he reacted with hostility. In retaliation, he not only ensured that the city's leaders were excommunicated, but also granted the Normans of Apulia the authority to act against Benevento on his behalf. Effectively, this placed the proverbial fox in charge of the henhouse, a decision the Normans would later exploit to their advantage. Collectively, these imperial policies accelerated the decline of Lombard power and provided the Normans with an opportunity to expand their influence. The balance of power in southern Italy had shifted, and Henry's actions inadvertently laid the groundwork for Norman dominance in the region. The successes of the Normans attracted a steady influx of new recruits, among whom were two figures who would later play a central role in the next phase of Norman expansion. The first was Richard, the son of Ascleton, who had been granted the title of Baron of Aceranza during the partition of Melfi. Richard was also the nephew of Reinulf, the first Norman ruler of Aversa. The second key arrival was Robert of Hauteville, the fourth son of Tancred to journey to Italy. Robert would not only become the most renowned among his brothers, but would also emerge as Richard's future rival. Both men faced inauspicious beginnings upon their arrival. Richard's early experience in Aversa was as unpromising as Robert's was in Melfi. Count Drogo, who seemed to hold some reservations about the sons of Tancred's second wife, was already aware of his younger half-brother's remarkable talent and ambition, a combination he viewed as dangerous. Consequently, Drogo rejected Robert, denying him immediate opportunities within the Norman ranks. Robert soon found employment under Pandulf of Capua, but given their strong-willed personalities, conflict was inevitable. A dispute arose over alleged promises of land and a marriage alliance, leading Robert to part ways with Pandulf and once again seek opportunities with his brother. This time, Count Drogo had devised a plan that would both advance the family's interests and keep Robert at a distance from the center of power. He assigned Robert, along with his small band of followers, to garrison the frontier fortress of Scribla, which had been constructed by William and Guaimar approximately 3 years earlier in Byzantine-controlled Calabria. Situated in a remote, malaria-ridden region, the fortress was hardly a coveted posting. Although it overlooked the coastal plain where the ancient Greek city of Sybaris had once flourished in prosperity, there was little of its former opulence left to be found. The conditions Robert and his men faced were harsh, offering none of the comforts historically associated with the region. Their survival depended largely on extracting resources from the impoverished local Calabrian population, who were themselves struggling to subsist. The next frontier for expansion lay in the Byzantine province of Calabria. Calabria presented an intriguing opportunity for the Hauteville brothers. Their gradual yet expanding conquest of Apulia had begun to make many of the Norman adventurer knights wealthy, with the Hautevilles and their cousins, the sons of Ami, leading the way. In addition to their growing wealth, the sons of Tancred had started to enjoy the privileges that came with their political leadership and the attention of other regional leaders. Despite this newfound prosperity, the Normans' ambition remained undiminished. As a friendly chronicler noted, they wanted to have every people subject to them and under their lordship. The Normans' push into Calabria, which was not anticipated in the partition of Melfi, was driven by the efforts of individual knights seeking to claim land for themselves. Among them, the Hauteville family was particularly well positioned to lead these campaigns. Drogo, as the leader of the Norman effort, had a significant advantage over other Normans in mobilizing resources. Additionally, under the terms of the Melfi Agreement, he had the authority to seize land in Calabria and grant fiefs to new vassals. At first, the Hauteville brothers' advance into Calabria was small-scale and cautious. They sought to understand the region and assess what they could secure on their own, rather than involving other barons who would have required compensation for participating in a joint venture. Calabria offered fewer rewards than Apulia. Much of its interior was mountainous, either densely forested or severely eroded, making it unsuitable for anything beyond subsistence farming. The coastal plains, meanwhile, remained underdeveloped due to the effects of malaria and centuries of Arab pirate raids, which had forced much of the population to seek refuge in inland mountain towns. These settlements were typically small, impoverished, and often in poor condition. Furthermore, their inhabitants had been heavily Hellenized since antiquity, fostering stronger loyalty to the Byzantine Empire than had been seen in Apulia. Despite these challenges, Calabria was still considered a worthwhile objective, and Robert was tasked with expanding the Hauteville family's claim, first established by Drogo. Drogo's initial step was to secure a permanent Hauteville presence in the region by sending Robert to garrison the fortress at Scribla. Strategically positioned, Scribla lay along an ancient Roman road that continued to serve as a major route through the region. Additionally, its location at the edge of the Val di Crati, the only relatively broad, fertile, and arable valley in the province, offered a valuable point of control. However, Robert and his followers were given limited resources for their mission. They would be required to live off the land as they worked to establish their presence and expand their influence. In 1048, Norman forces under Drogo's command achieved a decisive victory over a Byzantine detachment at Tricarico. This triumph secured control of the crucial mountain passes, providing easier access to Calabria from the Norman-held territories in Apulia. Following this defeat, the Byzantines never again maintained a significant military presence in Calabria, effectively clearing the way for the sons of Tancred to extend their influence unopposed. For Robert and his band of brigand knights, the primary challenge was simply survival. He found himself in a land offering few valuable prizes, commanding fewer than 100 men, some of whom were locally recruited mercenaries from the settlements in the hills. With limited resources and no steady means of support, his followers resorted to the most basic forms of sustenance: robbery, extortion, and the exploitation of local peasants. Even the otherwise sympathetic chronicler Amatus was candid in his description. His knights were few. He had no money in his purse, and since he lacked everything except for meat, which he had in abundance, he lived as did the children of the desert. He went wherever he could find bread. He plundered continually as it pleased him. Where once he had done it in hiding, he came out to do it in the open. Despite his precarious and unstable existence, Robert was gradually preparing Calabria for its eventual conquest by the Hautevilles. He relocated his base from the unhealthy site at Scribla to a new fortress he constructed at San Marco Argentano, strategically positioned to give him control over the entire Val di Crati. While his raids on surrounding towns were not always successful, they nonetheless instilled fear in the local populations and encouraged them to prefer negotiating with the Normans rather than resisting them. In fact, Robert consciously used terror as a tool to compensate for the relatively small size of his forces. A common tactic was to set fire to crops and then demand payment to extinguish the flames. Over time, Robert also gained a reputation for shrewdness and cunning, traits he likely sought to cultivate. As one chronicler observed, whether he obtained the palm of victory for himself through craft or by the exercise of arms, Robert regarded it as the same. because what he was not always able to achieve through violence, he accomplished with the craftiness of his mind. This dual approach, combining force with strategic cleverness, allowed Robert to make significant inroads in his efforts to dominate the region. Some of the stories later recorded by Norman chroniclers were likely embellished or even mistakenly attributed to Robert. However, taken collectively, they depict a remarkable leader, one who could inspire his men through personal acts of bravery and strong leadership, yet who also shared in their hardships and, on occasion, their moments of leisure. Robert's presence in the Val di Crati provided him with the opportunity to maintain a relatively open relationship with Peter of Tyre, the Byzantine governor of the nearby town of Bisignano. The two met periodically to address various issues and resolve disputes. On one such occasion, Robert arranged a private meeting with Peter, ostensibly to continue their usual discussions. However, facing a severe shortage of funds, Robert exploited Peter's trusting nature, seized him by force, and held him for ransom. Once a substantial sum was paid, Peter was released and their relationship resumed, albeit with greater caution on Peter's part. Remarkably, after Robert later amassed considerable wealth, he compensated Peter with a sum far exceeding the original ransom. This episode underscores the dire financial circumstances Robert faced at the time, as well as his willingness to resort to calculated risks to secure the resources necessary for his survival and ambitions. Robert was steadily building a reputation for himself. He appeared to possess an innate understanding of leadership and the ability to project his image effectively, what might now be described as strategic public relations. This skill, as much as his actual military and political achievements, played a crucial role in his rise to prominence in Calabria. While Norman chroniclers consistently praised his character, the personality that emerges from his actions is one of immense ambition, intelligence, and charm, underpinned by a calculated and often ruthless mind. He understood that a great leader should be feared by his enemies and loved by his allies, an image he successfully cultivated among his contemporaries. Even during his most precarious days as a brigand, Robert shared both hardships and whatever spoils he acquired with his men, demonstrating generosity that was both personal and strategic. His largesse reflected the feudal ideal of chivalric nobility, which held that a true knight should not hoard wealth but instead distribute it to enhance his status and renown. However, Robert's generosity was not merely a matter of principle, it was also a tool for shaping his reputation. This is evident in his treatment of Geoffrey, the Bishop of Coutances in Normandy, who visited Italy in 1050. Despite Robert's own financial struggles at the time, he bestowed upon the bishop lavish gifts of gold, jewels, and fine textiles to support the construction of a new cathedral. At a time when Robert still needed to attract skilled warriors to his cause in Calabria, he seems to have been deliberately cultivating an image of a noble and generous leader. The extensive network linking the Normans in Italy with their homeland ensured that accounts of his largesse would spread widely, enhancing his appeal to ambitious knights in search of wealth and opportunity. This carefully crafted image of a magnanimous knight was far more advantageous to his cause than the harsh realities of his existence in Calabria. The Robert Hauteville who began to emerge on the world stage and who would dominate southern Italian politics for over a quarter of a century was a figure both loved by some of his allies and feared by both his enemies and his own supporters. While fame would eventually come, Robert was, at this stage, still a relatively minor warlord in a distant province. The Normans were not yet a serious threat to the Byzantine Empire, but they were becoming a growing and troublesome presence in the region. Over the course of a decade, the 12 Norman knights and their followers succeeded in carving out a loosely structured collection of counties in Apulia and beyond. They had wrested land and cities from the Byzantine authorities, established military settlements on unclaimed land to subdue their neighbors, extorted protection money from local communes, and, when necessary, seized church properties. Their ambitions were driven by a thirst for land, wealth, and the respect that such acquisitions afforded, and in the harsh, unscrupulous environment of the time, they proved highly effective. This rapid expansion not only made them formidable in military and economic terms, but also ensured their growing influence in the local political landscape. Although they were reluctant participants in larger political games, they had undeniably become important players in the regional balance of power.